The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above the Golden Autumn nursing home in San Marcos, Texas, where Nora Jameson leaned over to adjust a pillow beneath a frail woman's head. Mrs. Coleman, 93 and nearly blind from cataracts, sighed softly in appreciation. "You're quiet today, honey," she whispered, her clouded eyes searching Nora's face. Nora forced a smile, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Just tired, Mrs. Coleman. Nothing to worry about. But inside, exhaustion was the least of it. This day carried a weight she could never ignore. 5 years ago, on this very date, her life had been ripped apart. She still remembered the knock at the door of their apartment. She'd been fresh out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, expecting a neighbor asking for sugar or coffee. Instead, 2 officers stood there with grim faces. Behind them, Darius, her husband, her world, was sitting on the couch, wide-eyed and terrified. They read him his rights, snapped the cuffs on his wrists, and accused him of armed robbery. Nora had screamed that it was a mistake, that Darius had been with her the whole time. None of it mattered. Within weeks, fingerprints, shaky witness IDs, and a half-broken security tape pointed the blame squarely at him. And then came the worst part. The trial, the confession. He claimed he'd done it to pay for his mother's cancer treatments. 15 years in federal prison. 15 years for a crime Nora still couldn't believe he'd committed. That memory never dulled. Even now, as she walked the dull beige hallways of a nursing home, the weight of it pressed into her chest. She'd promised him she would wait, and she had, for 5 long years. A promise made through a fog of tears as the marshals led him away in chains. "I love you, Tash. Wait for me." The words echoed in her mind whenever the loneliness grew unbearable. She'd kept her end of the vow, though it nearly broke her. Her shift ended at 4 o'clock, and most days she would trudge home to her tiny apartment, eat whatever she could afford, and count the dollars she saved for the rare trips to Oakdale Federal Prison in Louisiana. 9 hours on a bus, each trip leaving her drained and broke, but worth it just to see Darius's smile through the glass. She pulled his photograph from her scrub pocket during her short break in the staff lounge. Him in his prison uniform, leaner than she remembered, eyes still bright. She rubbed the edge of the photo like it was a talisman. He was all she had left. When a head nurse asked if she could take an extra assignment, home care for a hip surgery patient in Riverside Estates, Nora said yes immediately. Extra money meant maybe one more visit to Darius before Christmas. She took the folder, noted the address, number 32 Oak Street, and set off after her shift ended. The buses rattled her through the city until she finally stepped off into a different world. Riverside Estates gleamed with wide lawns, new SUVs, manicured hedges, a place she had never belonged. As she walked down Oak Street, she found the house. White facade, neat windows, a sleek black vehicle in the driveway. She was almost at the door when she noticed a man emerging from the house next door. Her steps faltered. Something about his walk, the tilt of his head, froze her in place. He turned to close the door, and her heart stopped. It couldn't be. The tall frame, the broad shoulders, that unmistakable profile. This was Darius. Darius, who was supposed to be locked in a concrete cell 9 hours away. He slid easily into a silver sedan, clean-cut and dressed like he belonged in this wealthy neighborhood. He didn't see her, didn't even glance her way, but as the car rolled past, she caught his face in the glow of the setting sun. It was him. No doubt. Her throat tightened, her vision swam, and for a second she thought she might collapse right there on the spotless sidewalk. She half ran after the car, desperate to make sense of it, but the sedan disappeared around the corner, leaving her gasping for air. Nora's mind reeled. She turned back to the house he had walked out of, number 34. Through the broad windows, she glimpsed a young woman holding a baby. The woman's hair was braided into an elegant crown, her smile soft as she rocked the child. A picture of family, warmth, and stability. And Nora's insides twisted. That man, the one she had loved, waited for, cried for, was he standing in that very house, living another life while she suffered alone? Her legs carried her away almost without thought, across the street to the patient's home she was scheduled to visit. She forced herself through the appointment, barely hearing the old man's questions, her hands trembling as she filled in the charts. By the time she returned home that night, her heart pounded with questions she couldn't silence. Darius was in prison. She had letters, phone calls, photographs proving it. Yet she had seen him with her own eyes on a clean street in Riverside Estates. Maybe she was going crazy. Maybe grief and longing had made her hallucinate. But she knew it was him. And no matter the cost, she would find out the truth. Nora barely slept that night. She tossed and turned on the narrow mattress in her one-bedroom apartment, replaying the scene over and over again. The man's face, the cut of his jawline, the way he carried himself. It was Darius. It had to be. Yet her mind kept slamming against the impossible wall of reality. Her husband was in Oakdale Federal Prison, serving 15 years for armed robbery. She had the letters. She had the phone calls. She had sat across from him in the visiting room, separated by glass and guards. How could he be walking free in a wealthy neighborhood, dressed in tailored clothes, kissing a woman who wasn't her, cradling a baby that wasn't theirs? The next morning, exhaustion weighed down her body like chains, but adrenaline kept her upright. She skipped breakfast, poured herself bitter coffee, and sat at the edge of the bed with Darius's last letter spread out on her lap. His handwriting slanted, messy from prison pens, spoke of missing her, of counting the days, of good behavior reports that might one day shave a few years off a sentence. Every word rang with sincerity. She pressed the paper to her lips, her hands shaking. That man she had seen couldn't have been anyone else. But if the prison swore Darius was still inside, then what explanation remained? By mid-morning, Nora couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. She pulled the old landline phone across the table and dialed Oakdale's number, her heart hammering as the ring buzzed in her ear. A weary male voice answered. "Oakdale Federal Prison. How can I help you?" Nora swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. "Yes, I'm calling about an inmate, Darius Jameson. I'm his wife. Can you confirm his status?" There was a pause, the sound of fingers clacking across a keyboard. "Yes, ma'am. Inmate Jameson is in our custody, serving 15 years for armed robbery. Current location, cell block C." Nora's mouth went dry. "And he's physically there right now? He hasn't been transferred? Not in the hospital?" The clerk's tone sharpened with impatience. "Ma'am, if it says cell block C, that's where he is. Unless you got visiting scheduled, that's all the information I can provide." Her stomach dropped out beneath her. On paper, in official records, Darius was right where he'd always been, locked behind concrete walls. Yet her eyes had seen something her brain refused to dismiss. She hung up, her hand trembling so badly she nearly dropped the receiver. For hours she sat still, blinds drawn, staring at the pile of Darius's letters stacked neatly in the dresser drawer. She pulled one out, then another, reading his words like a woman searching for cracks in stone. He wrote about prison fights, about missing his mother before she passed, about longing for her touch. She even pulled out the photo he'd sent last year. Him in orange, hair cropped short, thinner but smiling bravely. The same smile she'd seen flash by from that silver sedan in Riverside Estates. It made no sense. Unless he had a twin brother no one ever spoke about. But Nora had met his entire family. His late mother, his younger sister. No hidden relatives, no mysterious look-alikes. Unless, she whispered the thought aloud, trembling as a word slipped past her lips. Someone pretending to be him. The idea chilled her, but also rang with cruel kind of logic. That would explain the suit, the wealthy house, the family. That would explain why Darius was still behind bars while his face strolled the manicured lawns of a new neighborhood. But who would do such a thing? And why? By evening, her determination hardened into something cold and sharp. She couldn't keep living in doubt, circling the same questions. She needed answers. She needed to see him again, whoever he was. She stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, dark circles under her eyes, lines of exhaustion etched into her skin. "Tomorrow," she whispered to herself. "Tomorrow I'll go back. I'll find out who that man is. And if I'm right, if someone's stealing my husband's life," her voice broke, her reflection blurring with tears, Then I'll make sure the world knows the truth. That night, lie awake in the stillness, Nora's heart pounded with a mix of dread and anticipation. She didn't know what she would uncover, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't imagining this. She had seen Darius Jameson walking free. And no matter how terrifying the truth might be, she was going to chase it down. The next day dawned gray and humid, the kind of Texas morning where the air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on every breath. Nora pulled on her best pair of jeans and a clean blouse, clothes she normally saved for prison visits. If she was going back to Riverside Estates, she didn't want to look like the exhausted aide who spent her nights scrubbing floors and changing sheets. She needed confidence, even if it was only a mask. The bus ride was long and rattling, her nerves scraping raw with each stop. By the time she stepped off near Oak Street, her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it echoed in her ears. The houses looked even more polished in daylight. Manicured lawns, fresh paint, shiny SUVs in the driveways. Nora felt small, out of place, like an intruder in a world that had never been meant for her. She kept her pace steady, pretending to scroll on her phone as she passed the homes, eyes scanning every detail. When she reached number 34, her stomach clenched. Through the wide front window, she could see Selena Parker, the young woman she'd glimpsed before, gently bouncing her baby in her arms. The scene was almost too perfect. The soft afternoon light, the child giggling, the mother smiling. Nora's chest tightened with a mix of grief and anger. Whoever the man was that lived here, he had stolen her life. Nora walked to the park at the end of the street and sat on a bench, pretending to read a book on her phone. She waited. An hour passed before she saw him again. Malik Johnson, though she didn't yet know his name, strolled into view in a sharp navy suit, a leather briefcase swinging at his side. He moved with the casual assurance of a man who belonged in this neighborhood, who had nothing to fear. Nora's breath caught in her throat. It was Darius. Or at least, it was a man who wore his face. She watched as he leaned down to kiss Selena, then scooped the baby into his arms with a smile so disarmingly familiar it sent chills down her spine. The three of them walked back to the house together, and for a moment Nora almost forgot to breathe. Her world had split in two, Darius rotting in a cell, and this stranger living free under his skin. By the time Selena and the child left again, this time in a cab, the baby's head resting against his mother's shoulder, Nora's decision was already made. She wasn't leaving without answers. She marched up the driveway, her knees trembling, and pressed the doorbell. The man opened the door. For a heartbeat, the world spun. Up close, the resemblance was uncanny. The eyes, the set of his jaw, the deep timbre of his voice when he spoke her name. Nora. Her stomach dropped. He recognized her. "Who are you?" she demanded, folding her arms across her chest. "Because you're not my husband. My husband is in Oakdale Federal Prison. I confirmed it yesterday." The man's eyes darted nervously toward the street. He grabbed her arm and pulled her inside, slamming the door shut. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed. Nora yanked her arm free, her voice sharp with fury. "Answer me. Who are you, and why do you look exactly like Darius?" For a long moment he stared at her, the muscles in his jaw twitching, as though he was weighing his options. Finally, he exhaled, running a hand down his face. "Damn it, this wasn't supposed to happen. You weren't supposed to see me." "Too late," Nora snapped. He raised both hands, palms out in mock surrender. "All right, my name's Malik Johnson. People call me Zeke. I'm Darius's cousin." Nora's brow furrowed in disbelief. "Cousin? He never mentioned you." "Not surprised. We didn't get along as kids. I moved away to Atlanta when I was 10. Haven't seen much of him since." Malik's grin was thin, forced. "But yeah, I came back around the time of that incident." Her heart raced. "What incident?" His expression darkened. He glanced toward the window as if someone might be listening, then lowered his voice. "The robbery. Look, we came up with a plan together. Quick cash, nobody gets hurt. But I'm the one who went in, masked up, things went sideways, a guard got involved. I panicked. The cops thought it was Darius. He confessed to protect me." The room seemed to tilt around her. You're telling me my husband is in prison because of you? Malik shifted uncomfortably, but nodded. He figured with his clean record, he'd get off easier. Me? I was looking at life. Nora's fury surged, hot and blinding. He got 15 years because of you. And now you're here, living in his name, in this beautiful house, with his family, while he wastes away in a cell. The remorse in Malik's eyes flickered, then vanished, replaced by something colder. You don't have proof. You think the cops will believe you? It's his word against mine, and he already confessed. Besides, he pulled out his phone and showed her a photo of Darius in the prison cafeteria, surrounded by other inmates. I have people watching him, friends on the inside. If you mess with me, if you try to ruin this life I built, his life in there gets a lot harder. You understand me? Nora's blood ran cold. She stared at the man who wore her husband's face, who had stolen his freedom, and realized she was standing across from someone far more dangerous than she'd imagined. And as she left the house, the slam of the door echoing behind her, one truth crystallized in her mind. Malik Johnson had built his life on lies, and she was the only one who could tear it all down. Nora walked home from Riverside Estates with her heart pounding so hard she thought the neighbors could hear it. The streets of San Marcos blurred around her. She barely registered the traffic lights or the chatter of passers-by. Malik Johnson's words replayed in her mind, like a curse she couldn't shake. I have people watching him. If you ruin this life, his life in there gets a lot harder. It wasn't just a threat. It was a knife pressed against Darius's throat from 9 hours away. Back in her apartment, she collapsed onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. The walls felt smaller than ever, as though they were closing in on her. Her husband had lost 5 years of his life, and she had just discovered the man responsible was living freely, masquerading as him, raising a family under his name. Yet she couldn't tell anyone. Not the police, not the courts. If Malik really had connections in Oakdale prison, a single word from her could condemn Darius to torment, or worse. Her eyes drifted toward the dresser. She pulled open the top drawer, dragging out the shoebox full of letters from Darius. One by one, she spread them across the table. His words, sometimes messy, sometimes painfully neat, were her only tether to sanity. She picked up the most recent one, read it until the ink blurred through her tears. I miss you, Nora. I keep my head down. I dream of the day you'll be waiting at the gate for me. He believed she was out here keeping his life intact, protecting what little they had left. How could she tell him the truth? That his cousin had stolen not only his freedom, but his very identity? The next day, she dragged herself to work, moving like a ghost among the residents at the nursing home. She smiled mechanically, lifted trays, refilled water pitchers. But the entire time, her mind circled the same prison of thoughts. If she told Selena Parker, Malik's unsuspecting wife, what would happen? The woman deserved to know. But Malik's warning burned in her ears. Don't you dare even come near her. If you ruin my life, I'll ruin yours. On her lunch break, Nora slipped outside and sat at the far corner of the parking lot. She dialed Oakdale again, just to hear the clerk confirm once more. Yes, Darius Jameson was in cell block C. Yes, he was alive and accounted for. The clerk's tone was flat, impatient, but those sterile words were the only reassurance she had. At least for now, Malik hadn't pulled whatever strings he claimed he could. That night, her phone lit up with a number she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered. Malik's voice slid through the speaker, low and calm but edged with menace. You came into my house once. Don't make that mistake again. I told you what would happen if you open your mouth. Nora's throat tightened. You ruined his life, she hissed, her hand trembling so badly she nearly dropped the phone. And you're ruining mine. You think you're the only one who lost something? Malik's tone sharpened. I had a record. They would have buried me under the prison. Darius chose to protect me. His decision, not mine. And now I'm making something of this second chance. If you blow it, you take him down too. Her anger surged, but it was powerless against his cold logic. The call ended, leaving her alone with the deafening silence of her apartment. She sat for hours on the edge of her bed, tears streaking down her face, until finally she whispered into the dark, "What am I supposed to do?" Days passed in the same haze. Nora worked her shifts, counted her money, kept her head down. Every time she passed a mirror, she saw not just her own exhausted reflection, but Malik's smirk overlaying it. She imagined him at his bank job, smiling like Darius once had, while she fought back tears in the staff lounge. The injustice was unbearable. By the end of the week, something inside her snapped. She couldn't live like this, silenced, trapped, suffocating under Malik's threats. She pulled on her jacket, pacing her tiny apartment. Maybe she couldn't go to the police yet. Maybe she couldn't risk Darius's safety. But Selena Parker, she was innocent. She was raising a child with a man living a lie. Nora clenched her fists, her pulse steadying with a surge of resolve. If she couldn't free her husband yet, at least she could strip Malik of the perfect life he didn't deserve. She would find a way to tell Selena the truth, no matter what it cost her. And with that decision, a dangerous new path opened before her, one that would change everything. The evening sky over Riverside Estates glowed a dusky orange as Nora returned to Oak Street, her heart pounding with every step. She'd spent the whole day wrestling with her decision, but now it felt like something larger than her was pushing her forward. Selena Parker deserved to know the truth about the man she lived with, deserved to know that Malik Johnson was no husband at all, but a thief of another man's life. She lingered near the park at the end of the block, pretending to scroll through her phone, her eyes fixed on the house with the white facade and manicured lawn. A silver sedan sat in the driveway, confirming that Malik was home. Nora's palms were slick with sweat. She rehearsed the words she would say to Selena. "Your husband isn't who you think he is. He's not Darius Jameson. The real Darius is in prison." Every time she formed the sentence in her mind, the weight of Malik's threats pressed against her chest. Just after 9 o'clock, headlights cut through the street. A cab slowed in front of the house, and Nora's pulse spiked. Selena stepped out, cradling the baby against her shoulder. The child slept soundly, his tiny hand resting against her braid. Selena paid the driver and carried her son up the steps, fumbling for her keys. Nora stayed hidden behind a large oak tree across the street, watching every move. This was it. As soon as Selena was alone in the house, she would approach her face to face and reveal everything. But before Nora could move, a scream tore through the night. High-pitched, panicked, raw with terror. Nora froze. For one heartbeat, she thought it must be her imagination, until it came again, louder this time, spilling out into the quiet street like shattered glass. Without thinking, she bolted across the road. The front door hung open, Selena's voice wailing from inside. Nora burst through the entryway and followed the sounds into the kitchen. The sight that greeted her made her knees buckle. Malik lay sprawled on the tiled floor, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. A widening pool of blood spread beneath him, soaking into the grout, seeping toward the cabinets. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, lips parted as if frozen mid-breath. The sharp, acrid smell of gunpowder lingered in the air. Selena stood against the wall, clutching the baby so tightly his cries came out muffled against her chest. Her free hand covered her mouth, tears streaking down her cheeks. She let out a broken sob, eyes wide with disbelief. Nora stumbled forward, her instinct to reach the child, to calm the frantic young mother. But the slam of car doors outside stopped her cold. Blue and red lights flashed through the front windows, bathing the kitchen in a surreal, strobing glow. Within moments, the quiet suburban street swarmed with squad cars. Officers rushed inside, guns drawn, shouting commands. Hands up, step back from the body. Nora raised her trembling hands, retreating toward the wall. Selena was ushered into the living room, still holding her son. An officer grabbed Nora's arm, guiding her firmly toward the front porch. Neighbors had already gathered on their lawns, some in robes and slippers, whispering behind cupped hands. The spectacle of house number 34, cordoned off with yellow crime scene tape, had already begun. Nora's heart pounded so hard she thought she might pass out. Within minutes, she was seated in the back of a patrol car. The door clicked shut, sealing her inside. She wasn't cuffed, not yet, but the officer told her firmly to stay put until a detective arrived. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass, staring blankly at the swirl of police activity outside. Across the driveway, she spotted Selena in another cruiser, rocking her baby back and forth, eyes glassy and unblinking. A social worker crouched beside her, speaking softly, but Selena clutched the child as if letting go would shatter her completely. Nora hugged her own arms tight against her chest. Her mind raced. She hadn't touched Malik. She hadn't even stepped inside until after the shot. But to the police, her presence here was damning. A wife whose husband was in prison, suddenly linked to the man impersonating him, now found at the scene of his murder. It was motive, opportunity, everything rolled into one. An unmarked black SUV pulled up at the curb, and a tall woman stepped out. She moved with the calm authority of someone who had seen too many of these nights. Her dark suit neat, her high cheekbones illuminated by the flash of patrol lights. The crowd parted as she approached. She spoke briefly to a uniformed officer, then turned toward Nora's car. The door opened with a metallic click, and the woman slid in beside her. "Detective Camille Rowe, homicide," she said, her voice clipped but steady. Her sharp eyes studied Nora, not unkind but piercing, as though stripping away layers. "And you must be Nora Jameson." Nora swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I didn't kill him," she whispered. "That's what we're here to find out," Rowe replied, pulling a small notebook from her pocket. "Start from the beginning. Tell me everything you know about Malik Johnson." Nora's heart hammered as she opened her mouth. This was it. The lies, the secrets, the threats, all of it were to come out. She had walked into Riverside Estates, searching for truth. Instead, she had found blood on the floor, flashing lights outside, and her life spiraling into a nightmare she could no longer escape. The interrogation room smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee, the kind of place designed to grind people down. Nora sat rigid in her chair, fingers laced tightly together on the cold metal table. Her throat was raw from repeating the same phrase since the moment police had let her inside. "I didn't kill him." No one seemed inclined to believe her. Detective Camille Rowe entered without ceremony, a thick folder under one arm. She closed the door with a deliberate click and sat down across from Nora. Up close, her presence was even more formidable. Eyes sharp, posture unyielding, a woman who lived in the rhythm of truth and lies. She set the folder on the table, opened it slowly, and slid a few glossy photos forward. Nora winced at the sight. Malik Johnson sprawled on the kitchen floor, a dark stain spreading across his chest. His lifeless eyes stared past the camera, past everything. Ezekiel Malik Johnson. Rowe began, her voice calm, almost clinical. Shot once in the chest, at close range. Preliminary time of death, sometime between 5 and 7 o'clock this evening. The weapon hasn't been recovered yet. She studied Nora's face carefully. "And you, Ms. Jameson, were found inside the residence." Nora's chest tightened. "I heard the scream and ran inside. I never touched him. He was already dead when I got there." Rowe leaned back slightly, fingers steepled. "You had a motive, a strong one. This man," she tapped the photo, "was living under your husband's name, pretending to be him. If your story is true, then he stole your life. Any woman in your position would have been furious enough to want him gone." "I was furious," Nora admitted, her voice trembling but firm. "But I didn't pull that trigger. I don't even own a gun." The detective didn't blink. "That's easy enough to verify. We'll test your hands for gunpowder residue." "Do it," Nora snapped, surprising even herself with the force of her voice. A uniformed officer entered minutes later to perform the test. Nora sat silently as swabs brushed across her palms and fingertips. When they left, the silence in the room grew thick again. Rowe finally broke it. "Tell me what happened before the shooting. From the beginning. No details left out." So Nora did. She told Rowe everything. The sighted man on Oak Street, her disbelief, the phone call to Oakdale that confirmed Darius was still incarcerated. She described returning the next day, confronting Malik, hearing his confession that he had committed the robbery, and Darius had taken the fall. She told her about the threats, about the photo of Darius in the prison cafeteria, about Malik's warning that if she spoke out, her husband would pay for it behind bars. Roe listened in silence, pen moving across the page of her notebook with measured strokes. When Nora's voice finally trailed off, raw and exhausted, the detective looked up. So you're saying Malik Johnson admitted he was guilty of the robbery 5 years ago, and that your husband confessed only to protect him? Yes, Nora whispered. That's exactly what I'm saying. The detective's brow furrowed, her expression unreadable. You realize how difficult that is to prove. Darius confessed in court. The evidence pointed to him. Fingerprints, witness IDs. Because Malik looked just like him. Nora burst out, slamming her hand on the table. They could be twins. I swear to you, my husband is innocent. He's been wasting away in prison because he was too loyal to someone who betrayed him. The room fell quiet again. Rose's pen stilled. She regarded Nora for a long, heavy moment before finally closing the notebook. A knock came at the door. The officer slipped back in, handing Rose a slip of paper. She scanned it and nodded slightly. The GSR test came back negative. No gunpowder residue on your hands. Relief surged through Nora's chest, though it was short-lived. That doesn't clear you, Rose said evenly, but it makes it harder to place the gun in your hands. Luckily for you, we also pulled surveillance from a bank across the street from Johnson's house. She opened another folder and slid a still frame toward Nora. The grainy black and white image showed a gray sedan pulling up outside number 34 just after 5:30. Roe tapped the photo. That man, she pulled out another picture, is Leon Turner, known loan shark out of San Antonio. Not exactly the type you want knocking on your door. According to neighbors, he was in the house for about 10 minutes. Then he drove off. The timeline lines up with Malik Johnson's death. Nora's breath caught. So you believe me? Roe didn't answer immediately. She closed the folder, sat back, and folded her arms. What I believe doesn't matter. What I can prove does. Turner has motive. Money. You have motive. Revenge. Both are on my desk right now. She leaned forward, her gaze pinning Nora in place. But here's the difference. Turner already has blood on his hands. And if what you're saying about Malik's confession is true, then we may be looking at more than a murder case. We may be looking at a wrongful conviction. Nora's heart thudded painfully against her ribs. You'll reopen Darius's case? Rose's lips pressed into a thin line. I can't promise you that yet, but I can promise you this. I'll dig. If there are cracks in the story that put your husband behind bars, I'll find them. For the first time in days, a flicker of hope lit inside Nora's chest. It wasn't freedom yet, not for Darius, but it was a chance. Rose stood, gathering her files. You're free to go for now, Miss Jameson, but don't leave town. You're still a witness in a homicide investigation. She paused at the door, her voice lowering. And if you're lying to me, I'll know. When the door shut behind her, Nora slumped forward, burying her face in her hands. She had come to Riverside Estates searching for truth. Instead, she had been pulled into a murder investigation and forced to relive every nightmare of the past 5 years. But there was one thing Malik had been right about. Her life would never be the same again. The difference was, now, she had Detective Camille Rowe on her side. And that changed everything. The days that followed were a blur of waiting, phone calls, and restless pacing in Nora's apartment. Every time the phone rang, her stomach flipped with equal parts dread and hope. Detective Camille Rowe had promised to dig deeper into Darius's conviction, but Nora knew how fragile that promise was. Cases didn't just unravel overnight. Courts didn't just undo mistakes because a grieving woman insisted on it. Still, she clung to that sliver of possibility the way a drowning person clings to driftwood. On the third evening after Malik's death, Rowe called. We got Leon Turner in custody, the detective said flatly. Picked him up in San Antonio last night. He cracked faster than we thought. Confessed to shooting Malik Johnson over an unpaid debt. Said he came to collect, Johnson stalled, and things escalated. Nora sat heavily on the edge of her bed. So it's over? He admitted it. For the murder, yes, Rowe confirmed. But that doesn't close the book on the rest. Turner had no reason to lie about killing him. He all but bragged about it. which frees you from suspicion. But what you told me about Malik and your husband, that's where things get complicated. Her pulse quickened. Did you find anything? Please, detective, something that proves Darius didn't do it? Rose sighed, and for once, her voice carried something gentler than authority. We went back to the original robbery file, re-examined evidence with fresh eyes. The fingerprints on the weapon used? They were partial matches to your husband, but not complete. Back then, prosecutors brushed it off, said partials happen under pressure. But now, with the possibility of a look-alike cousin, those discrepancies matter. Nora pressed her free hand to her mouth, tears springing hot to her eyes. So it wasn't him. It couldn't have been him. It's not that simple, Ro cautioned. Your husband confessed. Juries don't forget that. But when we compared the original witness statements, we found inconsistencies too. One said the suspect had dreadlocks. Your husband cut his hair short years ago. Another swore the man's voice had a rough southern drawl. Your husband doesn't. Put together, these gaps might build reasonable doubt. Nora felt her chest swell with something she hadn't dared let in for years. Hope. For the first time since that knock on her door 5 years ago, she felt like the tide might be turning. Later that week, Ro arranged for Nora to meet with the assistant district attorney handling appeals. They sat in a cramped conference room at the courthouse, papers spread across the table. The ADA was cautious, clinical, but not dismissive. If what you're saying is true, Mrs. Jameson, and we can establish Malik Johnson's role, there's grounds to file a motion for a post-conviction review. Nora barely breathed through the meeting, afraid the words might vanish if she acknowledged them aloud. Review. New trial. A chance to finally rip the shackles of injustice from Darius's wrists. Outside the courthouse, the autumn wind whipped her hair across her face. She stood on the steps, gripping the railing, trying to steady herself. Malik's threats had nearly crushed her spirit. His death had nearly buried her beneath suspicion. But now, out of the wreckage, there was a path. Dangerous, narrow, but real. She wasn't the only one grappling with fallout. Selena Parker, Malik's widow, had finally agreed to speak with her after the funeral. They met at a coffee shop far from Riverside Estates. Selena's eyes still swollen from nights of crying. She clutched her baby close as she listened to Nora recount Malik's lies. When Nora finished, Selena shook her head slowly, tears sliding down her cheeks. He told me his family was gone, that he started over with nothing. I married a ghost. You didn't know, Nora said gently. He deceived both of us. But my husband, he's the one who paid the price. Selena looked at her, voice breaking. If there's anything I can do, anything to prove your husband's innocence, I will. Malik destroyed enough lives. It was an unexpected alliance, but one Nora welcomed. Perhaps Selena's testimony could tip the scales. Perhaps together, they could finally drag Malik's sins into the light. That night, Nora sat at her kitchen table, the shoebox of letters spread out once more. Only this time, she wasn't searching them for comfort. She was searching them for evidence. Dates, times, words that contradicted the prosecution's version of events. She highlighted every line where Darius hinted at his cousin, every mention that might be turned into proof. As the hours ticked past midnight, exhaustion set in, but determination kept her pen moving. For years she had been powerless, waiting on buses, waiting on letters, waiting on visiting days. But now she had a role to play. She could fight. When the phone rang just after dawn, she answered with bleary eyes. It was Ro again. We submitted the inconsistencies to the review board. The detective said, "Don't get ahead of yourself. This will take time. Months, maybe longer. But the fact that they're even considering it, that's something." Nora leaned back in her chair, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. 4 or 5 years, her world had been locked in stasis, revolving around absence and loss. But now there was movement. There was momentum. Malik's lies had collapsed in blood and violence. But out of that collapse, the truth had begun to breathe again. For the first time in a long time, Nora whispered aloud into the quiet of her apartment, as if Darius could hear her across the miles of concrete and steel. "Hold on, baby. I'm coming for you. This isn't the end." This is just the beginning. The bus ride to Oakdale Federal Prison felt longer than the 9 hours listed on the schedule. Every mile seemed to stretch, her anticipation and dread weighing down each passing moment. Nora sat by the window, her hands clutched in her lap, staring at the endless ribbon of highway. Her mind replayed the last 5 years like a film reel, letters written in shaky ink, phone calls cut short by guards, long visits where every hug was rationed and every kiss stolen under watchful eyes. But this trip was different. For the first time, she wasn't just visiting Darius to comfort him. She was coming with news that could change everything. By the time the bus pulled into the small town that housed the prison complex, the sky was already bruised with evening clouds. Nora's legs shook as she walked up the cracked pavement toward the high fences laced with barbed wire. The massive concrete buildings loomed like silent giants, unforgiving and cold. She cleared security, turned in her purse, and was led through a maze of sterile hallways until she stepped into the visiting room. The room buzzed with low chatter and the squeak of guards' boots against linoleum. Rows of tables stood under harsh fluorescent light. Families pressed close to men in orange uniforms. Nora's chest tightened as the far door opened. For a heartbeat, her breath caught. Then she saw him. Darius Jameson walked in, thinner than she remembered, his once strong frame now lean, shoulders slightly hunched under the weight of years behind bars. His hair was cropped close, his jaw sharper, but his eyes, his eyes were the same. When they found hers, they lit with a spark that made the whole room fade away. Nora! His voice cracked on her name as he hurried across the room. They were only allowed a brief hug at the start and end of visits, but he folded her into his arms with such desperation it nearly crushed her ribs. She held on tight, burying her face against his chest, breathing him in. "It's so good to see you," he whispered, pulling back just enough to search her face. "But you look worried. What's wrong?" Nora swallowed hard, gripping his hands across the table after they sat down. "Dee, I have so much to tell you. Things you won't believe." He tilted his head, confusion knitting his brow. "What is it?" So she told him. Piece by piece, she laid out the nightmare. Seeing Malik in Riverside Estates, the confrontation in his house, his confession that he had been the one who committed the robbery. She told him about the threats, about the photo Malik had of him in the cafeteria, about the murder that followed. She recounted the flashing lights, the interrogation with Detective Camille Rowe, and finally, the hope, the inconsistencies in the case, the review petition. Darius sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, eyes dark with shock. He admitted it to you? Malik told you he was the one. Nora nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. Yes, he bragged about it. Said you took the fall because you thought you could get a lighter sentence. He used your name to build a new life. And now he's dead, shot by some lone shark. But Detective Rowe is reopening your case. They're looking at the fingerprints, the witnesses. There's hope now. Darius leaned back, his hand raking across his face. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he gave a hollow laugh that made Nora's heart ache. I should have known. I thought I was helping him. Nora, he begged me. Said if I got caught again, they'd bury me for life. And he shook his head. I thought I was doing the right thing. Protecting him. Protecting you and Mama. He promised to take care of you if I went down. I was so damn naive. Nora reached across the table, squeezing his hands tight. No, you were kind, too kind, and he betrayed that. But now the truth is coming out. We can fight this. We will fight this. His eyes softened, brimming with both regret and a fragile kind of hope. You really think there's a chance? I know there is, she said firmly, tears spilling over her cheeks. Camille Rowe isn't like the others. She believes something went wrong. And I won't stop until you're free. I don't care how long it takes. For the first time in years, she saw his lips curve into a real smile. Not the forced brave smile of his letters, but something genuine, alive. You're still here. After everything. Always. Nora whispered. I love you, Dee. I never stopped. The guard's voice echoed through the room. Visiting hours ending. Couples and families began their reluctant goodbyes. Darius stood, pulling her into one last embrace. He held her as though trying to memorize the feel of her, as though the strength of that moment could carry him through the gray days ahead. "I love you, Nora," he whispered against her hair. "Always have. Always will." "I'll wait," she promised, her voice breaking. "No matter how long it takes." As she walked out of prison, the weight of years pressed heavy on her shoulders, but for the first time in so long, she carried something else too: hope. The fight ahead would be long, tangled in courts and evidence, but she had a goal now, a fire burning inside her. She would clear his name. She would bring him home. The night air hit her face as she stepped outside, crisp and cool, and Nora drew in a long, shuddering breath. The life she had known had been built on waiting, on grief, on surviving one day at a time. But now she was ready to fight. The man she loved was still behind bars, but he was no longer alone in the darkness, and neither was she.